subjective opinion. But that's where I think it also comes in that clash with liberalism, because liberalism and feminism adjusts with the times and changes. Whether you think it's adjusting for the better or worse is open.
The thing is, that's one of the misconceptions, I would say. Because I would say that all three of those religions, Islam, Christianity and Judaism, all three of them have an inbuilt flexibility of some sorts.
Really?
Yeah. So I've got another book coming out. Cause I've got two coming out soon, yeah? That's why I was quite busy, you know, I've got two coming out. Another one is called the Liberal Critique of Rida. Rida is what is commonly referred to as the Apostasy law. I made a book about it.
How do you spell it?
R-I-D-D-A. But the thing is, I'll publicize it when it comes out. The point I'm making is this, is that you need to first appreciate that Islam has an inbuilt flexibility. I coined the term in my book, I called it Sharia consequentialism, in the sense that the Sharia is not like a rock, that it doesn't adjust. Imam Shafi'i, one of the scholars of Islam, who wrote a book called Al-Risala, which is a book of the principles of jurisprudence, he says, إِذَا ضَاقَ الْأَمْرُ اتَّسَعَتِ الشَّرِيعَةُ وَإِذَا اتَّسَعَتِ الشَّرِيعَةُ ضَاقَ الْأَمْرُ. He says that if the situation becomes more constrained, the Sharia becomes more accommodating. So in other words, it becomes more flexible. Or when the situation becomes more flexible, the Sharia becomes more constrained. In other words, the Sharia contracts, it moves, it's chameleon-like. It's not the rules that apply to 7th century Arabia. Only an ignorant jurist would tell you the same exact parameters apply in the 21st century.
Really?
Yeah, only an ignorant, someone who does not know usul al-fiqh whatsoever. Yeah, if you think that fiqh al-tamkeen, which is the jurisprudence of when you're in a position of power as Muslims, have an empire and so on, is the same as fiqh al-istid'af, which is when you're in a position where you are minorities or aqalliyat as a Muslim minority, then you don't know Islam, because the Prophet did not do this. The Prophet did not act the same way when there was an empire, when there was a big army, as he did when there was a few people living in Mecca. He learnt to deal with the circumstances in a facilitative way and in a compromising way, where the principles of Islam are never compromised, because the Quran says, وَدُّوا لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا فَيُدْهِنُونَ. They want to compromise with you. They would love you to compromise with you so that you can compromise with them. In what? In the usul, in the aqidah, in the principles of Islam, not in the Sharia. Sharia is open to compromise, and the biggest evidence of that is Hudaybiyah.
So then from what you're saying then, since the flexibility there is there within the Sharia,
yes,
it shouldn't really have a problem with liberalism or feminism.
Look, I'm not saying that Islam has a problem with liberalism and feminism. That's never my argument. My argument is this. We always ask the question, to what extent is Islam compatible with feminism? I'm saying, no problem, it's a good question, we'll answer it. And the answer is to some extent. But there is another question we have to answer, which is, to what extent is feminism, is that compatible with Islam? And they're two different questions. Same thing, if I say, to what extent is Islam compatible with liberalism, it's a different question to asking, to what extent is liberalism compatible with Islam? Now, I'm saying that, look, we should have an equal epistemic weight. When we're starting from the beginning, why do we always have to bend our backs and change our ways for the other person? What we're saying is compromise, which I think is needed. I believe in the accommodative approach. Requires a
things that shouldn't be compromised on?
Yes, which are the usul, the aqidah, the things which are like, we believe in one God, we believe the Prophet Muhammad is a messenger.
Sure.
We believe in the 6 pillars of Iman. These will never be compromised on. However, if someone says to me, this is my argument with the Ridda law, which is referred to as the Apostasy law. You have, let's say for example, you have an Islamic nation now, a Muslim nation. Classically, if you go into the books of fiqh, which is jurisprudence, they will say that the punishment for an apostate, if he's a man, and where he's socially contracted to a state, and so on and so forth, and he goes against that, is like treason, therefore he can be killed. Yeah? However, the Prophet Muhammad in Hudaybiyah, listen to this. This is a true story, all right? And it's narrated authentically in the book of Shurut, in Kitab al-Shurut in Bukhari, right? The Prophet Muhammad had an agreement with the disbelievers of Quraysh, Suhail ibn Amir, where he said to him, Suhail said to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Suhail ibn Amr, he said to him that if your guys apostate, bring them back to us. In other words, no death penalty, nothing, right? Even if he does it openly and publicly, and all the so-called conditions are met. He says if he does that, bring him back. Therefore, it's just a strategic relocation.
Wow,
what did the Prophet?
Convenient term, no?
Yeah. What did the Prophet Muhammad?
Same thing as imprisonment, strategic relocation.
Okay. Well, look, the Prophet. What did he do? He agreed to those terms, and so what happened? Whenever there was an apostate in one state, he was returned. Now the question is that still applicable today? Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he says it is applicable today, and he says the majority of scholars say that. If you look at the majority of fiqh opinions, it says that's applicable. So these punitive laws, which have become somewhat of like the main point of discussion for a lot of people nowadays, right? Say, look, Islam allows cutting off hands, and it allows, the death penalty for the adulterer and this and that. And for the prize horse of that, the prize horse is Rida. You say, how can you not? This goes against human rights. I mean, you say that you believe in la ikraha fi din, no compulsion religion, but at the same time you're killing someone because of the religion, so on and so. We say no. We say not necessarily. We're saying in certain conditions, yeah, but the Prophet ﷺ, there was precedence from his lifetime where he didn't do that. So if it's within the Sharia ability of a hakim to say, look, if there's a non-Muslim, they'll make a contract with another non-Muslim, a Muslim state. I'm not talking about in the West here, because we know the ruling is none of that is applicable here. We're talking about in a Muslim state. I'm being very clear. Brunei, let me be even more clear. Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia, and I'm telling you this explicitly after I've done my research and I've spoken to the scholars of different denominations. If Saudi Arabia made an, I'm not using them as a mithali state that they're imposing Islamic law. I'm just saying that they have been imposing a lot of the punitive laws, yeah, which is true. If they done an agreement with the non-Muslim state, say, look, anyone who does apostasy from our side, they won't be killed or nothing will happen, this will happen, X thing will happen, which is agreed upon, yeah, that can easily be arranged. Now that's the point.
What is that process called?
It's called an ittifaqiyya. It's called an agreement between two states. The point is, the Sharia has an inbuilt ability to allow for certain things to happen for the maslahah or the common interest of just not only the Muslims but the non-Muslims as well. It can do that. So the thing is, I feel like what's happened in the West, and this is the argument I make in the book, is that you have a concept which is a social contract in liberal theory, and attached to that concept you have things like treason, okay, treason law and so on, which have death penalty implications everywhere and have historically had death penalty implications. And then you can call this whatever you want to call it. But the thing is, for someone saying or doing something symbolic and non-military, they can be killed and have been killed. I'll give you an example. The case study I use, because I try and use equal case studies in the book, I use a case study of this guy called William Mumford in 1862. He teared down an American flag and got killed. But that's not an aggressive military act. That is a symbolic act. He did something, but that's against, someone would argue that's against freedom of speech. Why did the Americans kill him? This was at the time of Abraham Lincoln. Okay, this was in the American Civil War in 1862. All right, and he was killed for that. The point I'm making here is, it's possible and conceivable and has been empirically shown historically, even within the most quote-unquote liberal government, and even those states which are based on liberalism, that you can have death penalty implications for what is seen as a breach of the social contract and a breach of the peace.
Sure, but that should still be frowned upon. So just because another system has done something immoral, wrong, or just ill-advised, does not sort of cleanse the hands of another system to do the same. So just because what you said is valid. He has been basically killed for a symbolic act. Now, that does not justify this symbolic killing, nor should apostasy be seen as a symbolic, it can be seen as symbolic treason, but you should still not be executed for this.
Alright, well, so the thing is,
it doesn't, just because you
no
quoted
problem.
an example where
Yeah.
it's still wrong, it's just
I get what you're saying. Your argument is valid if you can say, well, the human rights values that we believe in are standalone values, but the reality is that they're an outgrowth of liberalism itself.
Sorry?
human rights and the values that are like in the post-1948 collection of human rights that we have now, of 30 other human rights that are mentioned.
Right.
That collection and those human rights are referred to and previously referred to as natural rights. They are an outgrowth of liberalism. They don't stand alone.
Not necessarily. They can stand alone.
No, but they're not. I'm not saying that they can.
It doesn't, like, look, you can still say the same, that, for instance, someone who grows up in Saudi Arabia is a Muslim, but that doesn't matter. You can grow up in Germany and still be a Muslim. Just because it is linked to these things doesn't mean that they cannot stand alone, just as principles.
All right,
so
if you have those
principles don't need to be based in liberalism.
Good.
They can be based in any political or social system.
No, you're saying they can be. What I'm saying is that there is. So these are two different things. There's a fine line between, right?
Sure, but that doesn't, like, the position of human rights as an outgrowth of liberalism doesn't detract from their merits independently.
I see what you're saying. However, this is what I want to say in return to you. The reason why it's important...
Batteries still recording.
Oh, okay. So what I want to say in response to you is this. Liberalism itself has a series of axioms that it depends on.
Sure.
And also presuppositions that it depends on. One of them is that there's that freedom is a desirable thing.
Right.
For example, right?
Yep.
Now, obviously, human rights, it kind of takes from that in the sense that, for example, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and so on, they're seen as desirable. Why? Because the presupposition is that freedom is desirable. With that, there's a definition of freedom as well, which is, according to Hayek, okay, he says that freedom is a lack of coercion, okay? Now, if you want to take those definitions, because at the end of the day, you're going to need definitions to come to a conclusion of what's freedom, so that we can come to a conclusion of, you can't have freedom of speech without freedom, right? We agree. And if you don't have we don't have a definition of freedom, we can't have freedom of speech. Who offers the definition of freedom? Is it human rights as an ideology, which it isn't? No, it's liberalism, right? So we say, okay, this notion of freedom, if you look at Nozick's writing, he wrote a book called Utopia and the State.
Robert Nozick.
Yes, Nozick. So he wrote a book and he talks about the minimal state and so on and so forth. What I'm saying is he depends on throughout the book he depends on the definition of liberalism. Of freedom.
Yes.
Which is the same as we talk about Hayek.
Okay.
All right. So, and the minimalist state is an expression of what is the best kind of freedom. Okay. So if you say, okay, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of religion are good things, because freedom is a good thing. My question to you would be simple. Number one, what's your definition of freedom? And number two, how can you substantiate that definition of freedom? And number three, how can you then prove that it's a good thing? Because you said it's a merit, right? Human rights, which is not an ideology, doesn't have the answers to those questions. In fact, philosophers don't have the answers to those questions. You see, they're axiomatic. In the same way that if I say a tall, short man is a physical impossibility because of the law of non-contradiction. How can you prove the law of non-contradiction? You can't. It's axiomatic. There's no way of proving it.
But there's
in the same way, in the same way, the conception number one of freedom, or the definition of it, which by the way there's disagreement among liberals about, and number two, the postulation that it's a good thing. Both of those things are axiomatic. They're non-proven.
Sure.
Yeah. So then, from that angle, if you say, look, this is wrong. Bully and Mumford in 1862 being killed for just tearing down the flag, or the extrajudicial killings of X amount of Muslims or ex-Muslims or whatever it is in these places in America is a bad thing.
Right.
Because it strips them away from their freedom.
Right.
I'm saying to you, according to what notion of freedom?
Right.
And number one. Number two, and how can you prove it's wrong?
Right.
Yeah, so these are my questions.
Sure, no problem. So,
what's your name, by the way, sorry? What's your name?
Boyan.
Boyan.
Mohammed.
Yeah,
Are you a descendant from Ad Thamud?
Maybe, yeah.
Where are you from, Sam?
Egypt.
You Sam?
Huh?
Sam?
Muhammed.
Oh, Mohammed, sorry.
Yeah.
It says Sam here, so...
No.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Mohammed. Right, so, before I even address any of that, like, we always have axioms in any of our assumptions. Like, everything is axiomatic. Like, even like, cause and effect. Like, even that is, in effect, an axiom. Like, just because something has continually happened, like, you know, the sun continues to rise every day, that doesn't actually mean that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. This is just an imposition. This is an axiom.
Yeah.
So yes, absolutely, we always have to rely on some base axioms, and the less axioms we have to work with, the more sort of convenient they can be. Right? So yes, everything, like even social political systems have axioms as well as postulates, right? So, I mean, of course,
Absolutely.
anything is going to have a postulate and axiom. So, right, freedom. So the definition of freedom is of course crucial. I wouldn't be able to tell you the sort of dictionary.
Defined in the Constitution.
Lack of coercion.
Defined in law.
Right.
Backed up by the judiciary.
Sure. So, for instance,
That's how it works in this country.
Good.
That's how it works in America.
good. So the way I would sort of define freedom is sort of the ability or the freedom. Just the
Legal
ability.
right
Yeah.
to
Just
freedom.
No, just-
Legal right to freedom.
No, just the ability to choose without coercion or force, as long as your choices or your actions do not infringe upon the rights of others and do not harm them. Are you satisfied with this sort of definition?
Let me explain something.
Yeah,
Right?
let's not move away before we settle this.
No, you've just imposed the harm principle on the definition of freedom. So but you can't argue in a circle because that would be a. Let me explain.
I mean, why you think it's a circle? Yeah.
The harm principle, which John Stuart Mill talked about,
Yes.
is based on conceptions of freedom.
Sure.
Okay, but you can't put your definition of freedom as the harm principle and then substantiate the harm principle with that definition.
No, but you can call. You can.
So just to be clear of what I'm saying, John Stuart Mill, he uses utilitarian principles to say that the harm principle should be enacted, for example, in society, economy and politics, but more specifically in social liberalism, in society, right? But he starts with a pre-existing notion of freedom. But what you can't do in logic is you can't use a thing to prove a thing. So
I'm not using.
No. So what I'm saying is the liberal assumption, or sorry, the liberal prescription from a social liberal perspective is the harm principle. But before we get to the prescription, we have to go to the definition.
Sure.
So your definition is inclusive of the harm principle. So it's easy to come to a conclusion of the harm principle.
Sure, but that doesn't
Yeah.
look.
So look, let him. Sorry, just
You
to
asked for my definition. I provide.
No.
Yeah.
But the definitions that liberals use, human rights academics use, for example, are in line with what Hayek said.
Sure. and-
Hayek defines freedom very simply. He said it's a lack of coercion. That kind of definition is also used by Robert Nozick, okay, and he assumes that definition. So if you were to say that the definition is X, but it's not substantiated in the literature, I would say, look, you have to put your definition in a peer-reviewed journal, people have to discuss it, and then agree on it.
You asked me for my definition.
No, I said the definition.
Ah, no. I understood. You asked me what I would perceive as.
No, but then if we all work on our own individual definitions,
Look, that's fine.
Yeah.
I understood that you asked me for my definition, and this whole tangent wouldn't exist if I was
No
under the
problem.
impression that you like.
No. I want a robust definition, which is understood by people who make it a case for human rights and liberalism.
Sure.
I'm not talking about a definition which you just make up on the spot, without even without even thinking about it properly.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm not trying to.
No.
right?
You're not mistaken in saying that I thought of it on the spot.
Yeah.
That also doesn't detract from the validity of the definition, whether I thought about it for a year.
No,
or on the spot.
it doesn't detract from the validity of the definition. But if we're all making our own definitions here,
Sure.
no discussion can progress. Because if I say,
Sure.
what's a
But
tall man?
neither can it-
If I
neither
say,
can it
what's a
progress
tall,
if we just,
what's
you
a
know-
tall man? I'll say someone who's 6 foot. He says no, it's 6'1". He says no, someone's 6'2". And he says 7 foot. Then I become short.
Sure.
In the conception of him. But tall in the, so the point is, we have to work with definitions which are either available and argued in the literature.
No, in law. It's how it's
That's
operated in law.
fine as well. If you want to
No,
take,
that's the bottom line. That's where the rubber hits the road. In law, that's where freedom falls or
but what's your name?
Bill.
Bill. Look, that's a good approach. But what I want to put to you is that you mentioned America and Britain, right? So in America, the founding fathers of America, when they had the original documents like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, and so on and so forth, they based their legal definitions, their constitutional definitions, on number one, philosophical definitions of John Locke and other people. Number two, of pre-existing English precedent law. So, for example, the definitions of freedom of speech, expression, etc. A lot of it was actually taken from English law. And English law, a lot of it was influenced by philosophy. So we're going to end up having that philosophical discussion either way.
Always influenced by philosophy.
Right, there you have it. Yeah.
But they have to make these like philosophical ideas work on a day-to-day basis.
They try to, yeah.
No, that's what they try to do. You were talking about self-harm. You know, you can't ask me, you can't ask this gentleman here to murder me because that's an incitement to violence.
But if he
that's
was
against the law.
Brilliant.
Right? I can't go into a theatre and cry fire because it'll cause a panic and people are hurt. The idea
you're right.
talking about.
If he was a military, hold on. But let me tell you something.
Works with the law.
What's your Bill? Can I tell you something? Sorry. You said that he can't tell this guy to kill you, right?
Yeah.
But if he was a military commander and he was a soldier, he could, right? And the law, the liberal law, would allow that. If he was a parole, if he was some kind of working in the judiciary, and you are an executor in one of the states that allows execution, and then you would be killed, right? So it depends on who he is, and what the law says. So it's not always the case. Look, this is my point. When social liberalism comes into a practical application, you have certain things that would be allowed by law that would, on the face of it, be against human rights itself.
But there's always those exceptions.
For example, let me give you no, they're not exceptions.
They call it God in the gaps. There are always those exceptions.
But can I, with all due respect, let me explain to you why I think that basically liberalism is a self-contradiction, or it allows for contradictions to take place within it. There's two competing themes in liberalism. Okay, there's two competing themes. On the one hand, it's almost unanimously understood in contractarian liberalism that if you have a sovereign, that sovereign has the ability to make laws. Those laws must be obeyed. And the subordinate or the subjects have to obey those laws. Like me and you have to obey the laws of the land. In this country, Parliament is sovereign. Okay, Parliament, that is the constitutional paradigm.
The people.
No. Parliament is Parliament. Now, how does Parliament get its legitimacy? Parliament gets its legitimacy not only from voting, but it has its legitimacy intact. If we did not vote, Parliament would still be sovereign. That's the reality. When I was born, and for example, when I was about 18 years old, which was a good 10 years ago now, yeah?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and the rest. You've got to go.
No. Actually, it's 10 years ago. It doesn't believe. All right. No, 10 years ago, when I was 18, yeah, I could vote. See, now he's thinking like that. Yeah, no one believes it. But look, 10 years. I'm actually 27, by the way. Yeah.
I didn't mean that.
No, that's right. So 11 years ago, when I was 18 years old, I didn't vote, right? But I still had to obey the rules of the land. Isn't it correct? If I did something wrong, I might go to prison.
Sure.
Even if I don't vote, I still have to obey the laws of the land.
Sure.
And you know, that's justified on liberalism because there's a social contract theory which suggests that, look, if you come on the earth and you're in a certain place, they provide the military thing, their tax and so on, and therefore the system is that has, even Nozick says that. Yeah, even Nozick says that. You know, he's a minimalist, he's a libertarian, he says that. So the point is this, is that what if now the sovereign authority says we should have a death penalty? Okay? Like in America, there's a death penalty. And the reason why they're applying that death penalty is because the person is a traitor or a treason, he's doing treason or something. On social contract theory, there's no problem with that on liberalism.
Sure, but then you would look, then you would step away out of the, just look,
can I just add to that? So you see, the point is that human rights are an outgrowth of liberalism. If I say I want to have the freedom to say and do whatever I want, okay? He just mentioned two great examples. If I went to a thing that said fire, or nowadays if I go to say Allahu Akbar or something like that, then you know someone could arrest me, and someone will say maybe that's justified, you know. Sorry, the camera's on.
Oh, sorry.
That's right. He's come with his weapons. Look, you see, if a man and woman, husband and wife, come now and have intercourse on this floor right in front of us, and those policemen over there come and arrest them and say this is a public display of whatever it is, yeah? We're going to put you in the back of the van. John Stuart Mill says that's fine because we have certain sensibilities, you shouldn't do whatever you want, there's children around and so on.
Sure.
So that is a contradiction because if freedom is the best thing, to what extent can freedom operate?
These laws are decided by the people. You know, you went back to like execution, public execution. The reason why, if you go across America, not every state has execution. There's some states that don't have the death penalty. The reason for that is that in places like Texas, they decided we're going to bring back the death penalty. In other states, I think
they had it from the beginning.
They said no. It's the people that decide.
All right, perfect. So I've got a good question for you then. Can I ask him a question? Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Say if you have 100% of the electorate say we should have a death penalty for the blasphemer. They do a referendum and they say, look, whoever curses Jesus should be killed. 100%, not even 99%. Theoretical situation. The people are deciding that. Should that be enacted?
No.
You're saying no. What do you say?
Oh.
Oh yes. You see, look, contradiction. You see,
contradiction is part of any system that allows for freedom of choice.
No, not really. Actually. Well,
look, and one more thing before you continue. You mentioned before.
Going back before you make that statement.
Sure.
You said contradiction is part of any system that allows freedom of choice. Freedom of choice is not even defined at the moment yet. We have still not to pass that hurdle because he's saying the people should have a right to kill you, and he hasn't decided yet. But you're saying no, they shouldn't. But what is stronger, democracy or liberalism then? Is social liberalism stronger or is it democratic?
Sure.
So is my right to vote more important, or is his right, or is my right to have my life in these circumstances more important?
We're comparing the right to vote to a right to life.
Yeah, of course, because look,
there is no right to vote if there is no life. So categorically,
if you don't believe in the right to killing people, then you would outlaw war, wouldn't you?
Yes.
All right, so you're a pacifist.
Yes.
All right, so this is the problem. That view of pacifism is incompatible with social liberalism.
Again, why are you before we just
because someone will argue. Sorry, sir. I apologize. I keep interrupting. I will say this and just. Someone could argue you're living in a utopia, right? You think that you can live in a world where people will not attack each other and you can't kill someone, and at the same time, people can live a free life. Someone will argue the only reason why we have freedom, in fact, liberals will argue, Americans will argue, the only reasons why we have this freedom that we have is because our forefathers died in World War II, which is war, which is killing, right?
Yes.
So killing is justified in some context.
Yes, I agree.
But you said you're a pacifist.
Look, just because I'm against killing does not mean that there is not a circumstance under which I would defend myself or defend someone else. In the same sense that, for instance, you might be against public defecation, but let's say I have a stomach virus and I'm just like...
You put it on him, man. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And I'm bursting at the seams. I might give way, if you know what I mean. So, absolutely. Look, I think that a lot of these arguments boil down to an argument of futility. Absolutely, yes. You cannot implement all laws. Absolutely, right? There's always going to be extenuating circumstances to things. You always need to take things into consideration. And one thing before that you mentioned that we need to use definitions of pre-existing pre-existing definitions that have been discussed in literature. I actually agree with you. I think that economic rigor, the sort of academic rigor in any debate or discussion is extremely useful. However, it's also extremely limiting. If you want to further an idea based exclusively on previous work without any introduction, you're trying to make a hybrid that is like almost impossible. This chimera of an idea.
Your point there is well taken. I accept that point. In fact, Ibn Taymiyyah, who is one of the scholars of Islam, he wrote a book called Al-Radd al-Mantiqiyin. In the beginning, which means the response to the logicians. He said the first thing is you'll never find a definition which is all-encompassing.
Yep.
There's always a problem. Yeah. So he says that, but what you have to do, people of their own specialism know, like medical doctors know what they mean when they say X or Y or Z. They know what it is. You don't have to stress it too much.
Generally accepted.
Yeah, but an all-encompassing definition doesn't exist in the real world, is what his point is.
So what does he suggest? What's his solution?
He's saying that, to be honest with you, he seems to suggest that let's go back to what the people of that particular specialism say. For example, doctors, if we had this discussion, if it became too abstract, doctors wouldn't be able to do their work.
No.
Yeah, so he says that let them kind of come to an agreement on what things mean, peer review, and let that work, let that process work itself. It's never, and he admits it's never going to be a perfect system.
But isn't that what happens here now today?
It is.
Yeah.
It's the academic process.
Yeah.
But also in medicine as well.
Yes.
Also in
Yes.
medicine. And,
Yes.
They'll decide
What should we define? Yeah. You're right.
Does life end and stuff.
Absolutely. So here's what I'll say to you though. here's the biggest one of the biggest problems of liberalism. One of the things that is assumed is that you're living. This is Nozick's argument. He says, look, he says he doesn't believe in a social contract. By the way, he's one of the non-contractarian liberals, non-contractual / contractarian liberals. He says this. He says that originally you have perfect freedom, okay? And then what happens is the state takes more and more of your rights away through taxation, through manipulation, through punishment, and so on and so forth. And so what he proposes is something called a minimal state. Nozick starts with an assumption.
Right.
He says, look, he actually has a passage in his book that he says that if you have these people who want to get married, and these people want to get married,
right.
Let's say, for example, you want to get married, and there are three. Let's say you want to get married to women, yeah. And there's 3 other guys that want to also get married to women. Now these 3 other guys want to get married to, I'm sure he's smiling. No, he's married already. He's saying, I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to make this. I know he does. These guys want to get married, all right? Now, if these guys get married to the woman that you would have otherwise married, is that limiting of your option or not?
Well, it's up to her then, isn't it?
No, I'm not saying...
You're asking if that's a limitation of mine. Yes, but that's a natural limitation.
Yeah, that's what he says as well. But he says that's an acceptable limitation. So if look, let me say this one more time. You 3 want to get married. There are 3 girls to pubescent, legal. Just when I say girls, people will have the wrong idea. That want to get married. Now these 3 men get married to those 3 girls that you want to get married to, right? If that happens, then your freedom is limited.
Sure.
You see here, the problem is this: if you don't have a government and you don't have an imposition from a sovereign, that is taking your freedom away. When I go to the end of the month and I get my paycheck and there's money taken out from taxes, that's taking my freedom away, right? But at the same time, if you had a chaotic or anarchic state, that would be freedom limiting as well, because
there'd be no marriages. Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm saying there will be marriages, but everyone's freedom is still limited by other people. So you have a choice. Your freedom can either be limited by other people or the government. Or the government.
Yeah, it can be mediated or anarchic.
Right. So what we're saying is, if we agree that the freedom can and ought to be limited, it's justifiable, even from a utility perspective. Justifiably limited by the government. Now the question is to what extent. So
sure, always the question.
Now, right. So if you say, look, it should be to a minimal extent, where it's closest to that original state, then what will happen is, like for example, if we don't have a death penalty for a murderer, if let's be honest, if you have death penalty for murder, there will be less murders.
Not necessarily.
No. Let me explain. Theoretically, you'd assume it's a deterrent, there will be less murders. Let's just say for the sake of argument, if all things stay the same. However, if there's no death penalty, there will be more murders in a sense. Because if you cared about human life, you've got 2 choices. Either we kill these guys, who are the perpetrators, or we'll allow these deaths to happen, which will be done.
Imprison them and you've solved the problem without killing people.
Right, no problem. Yes, that could be something as well.
Deterrence. Is that what you
Yes.
Yeah, so punishment from the state. Punishment. Imagine if there was no jails. Forget about the death penalty thing. Sure. If there's no jails, right? Sure. If there was no jails, everyone will do whatever they want. Sure. Especially here in Speaker's Corner.
Again, no.
Well, a lot of people will do whatever they want. If there was no fear of consequence, right?
Look, we had...
Maybe you're a good man, but I would do lots of bad things.
We had tribal relations, and we had inter-tribe trade. We had inter-tribe war as well. We had social systems way before we had laws, way before we had institutions. I'm not saying institutions are bad. I'm not saying they don't work and they don't increase the utility and well-being of humans, or just creatures in general, right? But to assume that without a monarch or a sovereign, yes, you would have absolute anarchy. It's just there's no precedent for this. Yes, there's a precedent for an increase of it, and yes, there is a precedent for increase in volatility and sort of just return to basis instincts. But the imposition that you don't have social order without law or without a sovereign is just
I think there's a bit of an equivocation here.
Okay, please.
The fallacy of equivocation.
Yes, if there is, please point it out.
Let me explain. When I say anarchy, I'm not using the term vernacularly.
Okay.
I'm not saying like, it's chaos, like that.
No, you mean like a social system.
I'm talking about an ideology which is distinct from liberalism.
Sure.
And which has its own principles or lack thereof.
Absolutely.
Which is defined primarily as a lack of government.
Yes.
So anarchy cannot work in where there's a government. If there's a government and a sovereign, there's no anarchy.
That's not anarchy.
So the point is this: I'm saying that the anarchic system, in and of itself, it would you would assume that it would allow for more crime to take place because there's a lack of consequence, a fear of consequence.
Not necessarily.
You're saying not necessarily, but that's what the assumption is.
Because even if you don't have,
It's not necessary. You're right. It's not. It's not logically necessary.
it's not only that, but it also we have examples
Yeah. Of.
societies that have functions with, that function without government or without the rule of law.
Papua New Guinea.
That have social structure that is not what you would call, mayhem or like, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Like, yes, there's an increased proclivity because law by nature is a deterrent, right? It is, in fact, a limiting factor that is designed to increase utility. Design, it doesn't always work. But the imposition that without the rule of law or a sovereign, you return to a not anarchical, but just a murderous state is not empirical.
Let me make this clear, all right? Like, just in a normal sense. You all went to school, right? Maybe you are still in school, right? I don't know. So let's say you're in a school, and you're a teacher, and I was a teacher for some time.
True.
And there were no rules in the classroom.
True.
Now, what do you assume will happen in the? I mean, just use your brain. Do you think that the kids will be more behaved or less behaved?
Madness, chaos.
Right. Now, let's use that example with society. If there was no punishments in society, there's no prison. Prisons don't exist. Do you think that the crime will increase or decrease?
Look, man, you can't really use an example of children like someone who is literally at the minimum level of like capacity and awareness and experience in life, and then say, but what about society at large? Like,
okay, fine.
Yeah,
you don't like the example.
Yeah.
Let's use another example.
Sure, please.
A pub. You.
Pub, yes.
Yeah. I don't know if you go to.
Oh yeah.
You do, yeah. You don't look. You look quite. You have a high level of sobriety in this conversation, so I didn't assume that.
I tend to think that it stimulates my. I'm kidding.
No, it definitely doesn't. There's no evidence of that.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Don't take that yet.
So here's what I'm saying. If you go to, and if there was no rules,
right?
Look, we know how the deal.
Sure.
In Arabic, we have a nice poetic saying. "Man amina al-uqubata asa al-adab." Whoever fears the consequences will get rude to you.
Right.
Yeah. Hobbes said, "Man is covenants are but words if they're not backed by swords." If there's no fear of consequence, then everything can go, everything can happen.
Not necessarily.
And let me tell you something. We're talking about sovereign consequences.
Sure.
If there's no sovereign consequence, you know what will happen? There will be some kind of, basically, let's be honest. If there's no sovereign, you mentioned it yourself, tribal systems, right? Tribal systems are basically, they become a pseudo-government.
Over time.
Yeah, right. So they become like, they're in charge now. They're basically the head of the tribe becomes like a parliamentarian. The guy with the biggest gun will have the last say. That's what will happen.
Look, whilst I absolutely agree that this is the sort of
you don't agree with this?
No. Listen, I absolutely agree. This is the sort of moral progression, or I wouldn't call it moral. That's a really wrong term. It's a judicial progression, right? Like it usually goes to tend towards this. However, this is not a necessary state because we do actually have examples of.
Like what? Sorry.
So, for instance, if you go to the Amazon doesn't. Amazon tribes don't always have a village elder. They have a village elder just because he's the oldest, but he's not a leader. He's just an advising figure.
Well, look, I can't tell you that I'm an expert on the Amazon rainforest.
Neither am I. No, I'm just.
I know some of my friends actually went to the Amazon rainforest. When I went to certain places in Africa where they have tribe leaders,
right,
they're seen as the main men there, man. They're seen as the main men. Like usually it's men. Except in very few circumstances. And they're the ones who call the shots. They're basically like parliamentarians. You don't want to get rude to them, basically.
Right.
Look, let me tell you something. If you go to certain areas in London or New York or wherever these places, the police have less say than the gangsters.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
I mean, everyone knows this, right? But why? What's the gangster got that the police doesn't? He's got secrets, people's secrets. He's got influence, and he's got guns and knives. I mean, if you strip the gangsters away from that, they'll have no power anymore.
I mean, that's why the church used to have more power than the government.
Yeah, the point I'm making is that, it all boils down to this, like at the end of the day. So when we talk about liberalism, the idea is, okay, look, you're saying freedom of speech. I'm saying to what extent freedom of speech, right?
So am I.
Yeah, now you're saying freedom of speech to this extent. I'm saying, why did you pinpoint it at this level? Where really, the sovereign could have pinpointed it at that level. Look, there could justifiably be a law in this country as there was in 1381, right? of a treason law, and until 1988, I mean, it's said in the statute books, by the way, in the statute books, as far as I know, there was a treason law in this country that said that someone could be killed for treason until 1988, even after the time where the death penalty was...
1999, actually.
Really?
Yeah, 1999.
And look, that doesn't justify it.
When was the last case about that?
I think about 1968, actually.
Yeah, but that doesn't justify it.
No, I'm not saying it. Well, look, hold on. I say it does justify it.
Okay,
Here's my point. I'm saying that that law, that treason law that they had in place, was fully constitutionally justified and philosophically justified. There's no problem with the treason law. And in fact, this is my belief after looking at the data. I believe that when America and England have proper treason laws, because you know what's happened now? Let me tell you what's happened in this country, right? The treason law has pretty much changed to the counter-terrorism law. I mean, all the persecutions of counter-terrorism is pretty much what would have been included in the treason law, right? In America, it's changed to extradition.
Only for internal terror.
Yes, yeah. Look, in America, it's changed to extrajudicial killings. My view is that if society is clear, if the American government is clear with us, and the British government is clear with us, they say, look, if you do this, we will kill you.
Right.
Look, just be honest with us. We understand that there may be a need for that death. Just be honest.
It's self-defense.
No. If they say, and that thing that person could be doing may not be military.
Sure.
They could do thing of the treason. America is still in the Constitution, Article 2. But for the most part, they've gotten rid of the treason law. In this country, they've gotten rid of the treason law. And what you have instead is extrajudicial killings. You have them doing things outside of all them kind of nonsense things. So why don't you just tell us, as not only just the Muslim community or everyone else, just say, look, if you do this, you might die. We might actually put you in a room and shoot you to death.
Sure. And I'm not justifying
and I'm saying to you,
think that's good.
No, I think they should. Do you know why I say? Do you know why I say they should say that to us in a direct way? I say that.
It's not happening here, though.
Yeah, it's not happening. It's in America. They say if you do these things, we'll kill you.
He wasn't executed, was he? There's lots and lots of...
No, I'm not saying that. Look, these are just certain things.
No, he's not saying what I'm saying. He's saying what's going on.
I'm saying that. Look, look. Studies have shown that there have been thousands of extrajudicial killings. Let me explain what it shows. In America, they bring some guy like Abdurrahman al-Awlaqi, who's the son of, he's a kid, and they shoot him, right, with a drone or something. Okay, that's unjustifiable. It's a kid. He's got nothing to do with anything. But let's say, for example, there's other cases like it. They bring some guy and they kill him. Why? Because they say you're doing things that are going to lead to a jeopardizing of our security. There's a breach of social contract here. You're breaching the allegiance. But because they want to maintain the false fake narrative that, look, we allow freedom of speech and expression, they'll make it as if these things are just happening on the side. But if they were open and honest about it and say, look, if they said, look, we will kill you if you do this, what that does is those guys that are killed extrajudicially, that makes sense. Those guys that are being killed extrajudicially, right, which are thousands of people being killed those guys that are being killed extrajudicially, at least they'll be given a trial. At least, okay, there's two things they'll be given, a warning and a trial.
Sure, but you're defending freedom of speech right there.
No, that's not freedom of speech. That's a different thing altogether.
No, but look.
That's called habeas corpus rights.
Sure, but
right.
look.
So what I'm saying is that the Americans decide to take away habeas corpus rights at certain times. What I'm saying is, instead of doing that, why don't you just be honest with us and say, look, if you do these things, we're going to kill you.
They argue that they do it outside of America where the law doesn't apply. That's why
I mean, that's a bullshit excuse.
Yeah.
I know, I'm not justifying.
They still do it.
Yeah. It's not just, and like even in your example,
that doesn't infringe the American law.
Their ideas is,
you're giving an example of freedom of speech or freedom of expression or freedom of access to information is not being adequately followed. Just because they don't follow it doesn't mean the principle is not right.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the concept of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion doesn't exist in the real world in an absolute sense.
Look, freedom in an absolute sense
doesn't exist
at all.
So,
but that doesn't mean that freedom as a concept in degrees doesn't exist. It's like temperature.
All right, fine.
Temperature as an absolute doesn't exist. However, you can say 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 50 degrees.
Most societies have shown that we need some kind of law that if these people are traitors of our law, or if these people do these things, espionage or sedition or treason, we can't tolerate that to the extent where we'll kill them. Whether they do that judicially or extrajudicially, what I'm saying is, why don't you just be so open and honest about that, and give people a try. Right, be open. These are our limitations as a state.
Sure.
If someone does X, we will punish them with Y.
Sure.
Don't pretend that, okay, you're allowed to say whatever you want to say, but then take some guy out of his house at 3 o'clock in the morning and kill them with no trial.
No country allows absolute freedom of speech. Absolute freedom of speech as a defense point is a myth.
Yes.
Absolute freedom of speech doesn't exist. Absolute freedom of speech is allowed until this speech infringes, has the potential to cause physical harm. So calls to violence, releasing sensitive information on a case.
Yeah.
Releasing sensitive information in a case that will, obstruct investigations, like leaking personal information that can lead to personal attacks. So yes, you're allowed to speak your mind.
No, but it's not only
To
just
the
that.
point-
No, it's not just that. Sorry, just to cut you off. In America, there are, I'm not sure if you've ever seen this, there's something called the US flag code. Have you seen it?
Yes.
Desecrating the American flag is a crime in most states. And this
And I
was,
don't agree with that.
oh, look, you don't need to agree or disagree. That's a debate in America. And by the way, if I turn a flag upside down, look, you got a big American flag, yeah?
Yeah, and turn it upside down. It's crime.
If I turn it upside down in America, I mean, we're not talking about the medieval period here going so far away. If you turn a flag around or desecrate the flag or put it under your foot or something, you'll see on YouTube how people fight over that kind of thing.
And I disagree with
And
that.
moreover, you'll see that the Supreme Court of Justice, they repealed the court. It's called, I think it's Thompson versus Texas or something. Johnson versus Texas, 1988. Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, this guy, he went out, he put the flag under his foot. He was ripping up the flag and whatever. Johnson. In Texas, there was a flag desecration law. If you did that, you go to prison. They put him in prison.
Sure. and
Okay, wait. What I'm saying is, look, constitutionally and from a liberal perspective, did they have a right to do that? I say they did have a right to do that because they made it clear to him: if you do this to our flag, we will put you in prison. That's a law in the country. It's against freedom of expression and speech,
Yes.
but it's not against the social contract, and it's not against following law.
It is against the social contract.
No, it's not
Well,
against.
let me explain.
It's
Please.
not against the social
Look,
contract.
I still disagree with that.
Go
I
on.
still think that the argument that saying these guys are doing something bad, we should do it too. I think that's the worst possible argument you can make in defense of something.
It's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's look. I'm saying this is what I'm saying.
I am saying
no,
that
that's a
it's
straw man.
wrong.
Before you make that, I'm saying that they had a right to make that law. If the American people, through democracy or otherwise, decide that they don't want to see their flag being trampled upon, then that is something from a social contract and from a democratic perspective that should be honored. There's nothing wrong with that.
Sure, but look, if we all vote, we should kill a person.
Pardon?
Like if we all vote to
Yes.
kill an innocent person.
No, not an innocent person.
No, listen. If we all vote, because if this is democratic principle, if we all vote to kill an innocent person, should we go ahead with it?
Now here's the thing. That's you're outlining a contradiction between democracy and liberalism.
Yes, and that's also applying here.
Because no, the thing is, on
Because
this,
you're saying, look,
let me explain. Let me answer that.
You should apply that because people have voted for it. And I'm saying, no, there are certain things that we should keep off bounds,
Right.
regardless.
So innocence, how would you define that? Because here's the thing. If that person has gone against one of the rules of the sovereign, it wouldn't be called killing. It would be called execution, right?
It's a potato.
No, it's not potato,
It
my
is
friend.
potato.
Let me explain why. If
a man is a dead,
sorry,
he's a dead man.
when you go to war, if you go to war against an aggressive side, okay, when the British went to war against the Germans, no one referred to what is happening to the Germans, or as murder. They said that everyone has seen that as justified. What Hitler did, if you killed Hitler in front, if you came with a gun and you shot him in his,
War existed.
yeah. So the point
But
is,
that's still murder. It's just justified murder.
you can call
still
him
murder.
no problem, but it's not an innocent person anymore, is it? So it's justified.
Look, you can murder someone.
Yeah.
And if you murder, like not manslaughter, just murder.
Yep.
And you have a good reason to murder this person. Like, I don't know, you attacked me or you threatened someone else and I murdered you. That is murder. I'm, by definition, guilty of murder. Whether there's a justification for this murder is...
Here's what I'm saying. Look, me, I'm not a liberal, as you know. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. Yeah, I'm not a liberal. But what I'm saying is this. Here's my argument in the first place. My argument is, your argument as a libertarian, which left-leaning,
No, no.
well, you're believing in that direction, or someone who's kind of believes in that the state should have less rights to murder people, for example, yeah? That's your
I
argument.
believe in okay. Maybe
What's
just to clarify.
what's your position?
I do believe that the state has the right to mediate the social interactions between people. I do believe that. I do believe in democracy as to the extent that they should be able to elect representatives. Good, all well and done. However, I do not believe that the state should have the right to take away life.
Even in war?
Huh?
Even in war?
No, that's not the government taking away life. That's still you. That's
Say
still you
again?
pulling the trigger.
No, but I'm saying, in war, would your position apply in war or not?
It still would apply.
So there's no war. You don't believe that? So it's
No,
not,
I do believe in war.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that even in a war, it's not a government killing a person. It's still
No,
you.
but they're making the decision, isn't it?
Well, who makes the decision is irrelevant. At the end of the day, the person pulling the trigger makes the decision. The chain of command,
But it's
as
the
long as
state that decides.
Yeah,
It's
it's
the
just-
state
it
that
is the state. Look, is this
provides the weapon.
Right, is the state that provides the weapons.
that's
and
a state decision.
But if people don't fire a gun, there is no war. Are we clear with that? And I'm saying,
Yeah,
look,
but-
if you like, I'm not saying the state is not involved. I'm not saying the state doesn't exist and war doesn't exist.
Yeah.
All I'm saying.
So what's your
bottom line,
position?
It comes down to the person. The person pulls the trigger.
Okay.
Right.
So
And
no,
this is
so
another-
what's your position is unclear to me. So do you think that there should be no death penalty, right?
No, I don't think that's
Okay, no problem. I'm saying that position is as viable from a liberal perspective and a human rights perspective as a position that says that there can be a death penalty if it's regulated by the state
Sure,
and it's
but
agreed
why-
upon by the people.
Why are you complaining? Okay, I understand that you said that human rights are an outgrowth of liberalism, but human rights can oppose liberalism.
Here's what I would say. It's
And
not
like
yeah,
human rights
yeah.
are a standalone issue.
Yeah.
Human rights don't have to be attached to any political, religious, or social system. They can be a standalone principle that other systems can be tested against. It's not
Okay,
like,
but then
you know,
here's the problem.
Right, please.
They will only be understood through a liberal paradigm. We only understand.
exactly.
No. Okay. Here's my challenge to you then. Can you explain to me or show me, especially in the Western vernacular, and in the academic world,
Right, okay.
where human rights have been as a term has been expressed in a non-liberal paradigm?
In a non-liberal paradigm, you had forms of human rights in Yugoslavia, which was by no means a liberal.
No, but those. At what point are we talking about?
So we're talking about after the Second World War, after basically the formation of Yugoslavia. So Yugoslavia as basically a socialist state, right?
Okay.
They had a barter of. I wouldn't call them human rights. I mean, they were in the end human rights.
Call it human rights.
All right.
Same in the
Here's-
Soviet Union.
here's- no.
The right to a job,
Yeah.
the right to a house, the right to
Yeah.
healthcare. That's
All right.
what they.
Let me explain.
defended.
Okay.
Yeah, so there
nice.
you go. It's not liberal, and
that's-
it is the definition of human rights.
You're saying it's not liberal. I'm saying it is liberal, and I explain why. The reason why it's liberal is because you're conflating economic and political liberalism with a social liberalism. You could justifiably have a political communism, an economic communism, and a social liberalism.
You can, but those
And
are
by the
very
way,
incompatible.
no, they're not incompatible. I don't think they're incompatible at all. You can have a state of affairs where people still use a liberal paradigm in their social interactions and not in their political or economic interactions, which was the
Yeah, that's fine, that's fine.
which was the case, by the way. And I'm going to be controversial here. Say what you want, but in Hitler's Germany,
What do you mean exactly?
if you look at the pictures in Germany, you tell me what kind of system applied there. Yeah, you had a fascistic system, but the fascistic nationalistic system, but that was an extreme kind of neoconservative type liberalism, authoritarian liberalism, which depended on a heavy social contract theory. What I'm saying is,
Oh man, like if you take a piece of rock and heat it up, you get lava, man. Like that's you already lost the identity of what you wanted to define. So I mean,
no, I'm not. Because what I'm saying is, how do you define social liberalism? We define it through the works of, for example, John Stuart Mill, due to the harm principle.
Yeah,
you can do whatever you want so long as someone doesn't harm you. Now, what I'm saying is that did they not have those laws, kind of, in their own way, in the Soviet Union? They did. They did. But it wasn't
not fully.
not in a political and economic way.
not fully.
It was a
Right, well, not fully anywhere, my friend. Look, they're not fully in America, as you know, right?
Right.
But that's what I'm saying. They still look. The conceptions.
And it was such a perversion of those principles that I don't even know if
you
you
have to
could say
appreciate.
they
Look,
apply.
before
I could argue that-
let me make this extremely clear for you. But after 1948, That's when the United Nations had the Declaration of Human Rights. After World War II, which ended in 1945, right? Universal. The Soviet Union did they say we don't agree with that?
No, but they were tricky about their definition of that.
They were tricky about, look, the Soviet Union was tricky about the New World Order that America wanted to make through the IMF and the WHO and all these things. But the thing is, there's nothing real, but look, the point is this, is that those Declaration of Human Rights, which sprung about because of a social liberalism, was accepted by many of the communist states.
Sure.
So you can have human rights, social human rights, in a communist state.
But it was perverted. They fiddled it.
It's perverted everywhere. It's perverted in America right now, as we know, right? Maybe to less great extent.
It's a great example of why you can have that as a standalone basis to measure the extent of the application of human rights.
Here's what I'm saying. When they were developed from an American paradigm, when they made the document, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, how did they do it? Who was the ones making the decisions? It was Americans making the majority of the decisions.
No, it was Russia as well.
Yeah, of course they were there, but the majority of decision making in the UN is by America, especially after World War II, right?
Sure, but I think the nationality of those making the law
they were influenced.
Besides the point of its actual validity.
No, it's not, because let me explain why. When they were making the UN Declaration, they based many of their precepts on the Constitution of America and the Declaration of Human Rights.
Sure.
So when they did that, remember we said that goes back, those documents go back to social liberalism.
Sure.
Therefore there's a trickle down all the way from social liberalism of, obviously Mill came after, right? Mm-hmm. But the social liberalism, which was also espoused by John Locke, Montesquieu and those guys, went through to the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and then made its way into the UN Declaration of Human Rights.
Sure.
Those were not opposed in a wholehearted sense by the Soviets or the communists. Therefore, when we talk about human rights, therefore, it's impossible to conceive of them outside of a liberal paradigm.
So you're saying that it's been imposed upon the world? You're saying it's been imposed upon the world?
What I'm saying is when we talk about human rights, it's almost impossible to talk about...
Western values have been imposed upon the world.
What I'm saying is when we talk about human rights, especially those conceived of after 1948, it's almost impossible to conceive of them outside of a liberal paradigm. Therefore, if we find a contradiction between what is known to us as human rights, in an ideal sense, which we say doesn't exist in the real world, and also in the sense of social contract or what a state actually allows, then the question is, who's the arbitrator? The answer is really the arbitrator is the sovereign. The parliament will be the arbitrator.
That's not necessary.
Well, you're saying it's not logically necessary.
Look, man.
Yeah, I agree.
Let me tell. Yes.
I agree with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, you don't need. If you have a set of human rights as a principle, just as a principle, as a measuring stick, as whatever you want to call it, and you take that as a minimum sort of rights should be allowed to its citizens, wherever, whenever. You don't need the world police to measure yourself against those standards. Whether a country decides to be the world police and enforce those is an entirely different matter, right? But you don't need a sovereign to basically orient yourself towards a certain set of principles. In the same way that as a person, you don't need a sort of someone waving a stick over your head to abide to a certain set of principles.
One of the human rights is that a state should be sovereign.
Sure.
So, okay, my question is this. What should be prioritized? The human right number, 17, which says that the state should be sovereign, or human right number 1 or 2, which says that human beings should be free?
I would say number 1 and 2, because you do not have the prerequisites for any of the ones below.
But you would say that, by the way, you would say that in some cases and not others. Like, for example, in a case where there's murder going on and so on, you would say the sovereignty of the state should take the day and that person should go to jail or something, right? Someone commits murder.
No, listen.
But that's exactly what's happened. There's a whole load of Islamic Islamic Muslim countries that have never signed up to the Declaration of Human Rights. They have their own version, which is very similar.
I think Saudi and another country, Iran, wasn't it?
15, there's a load of them.
No, I don't know if it's 15. It was a few of them, but now
they're
all signed up.
doing exactly what you say. They've sort of said, look, this doesn't fit our paradigm, is that the right word? It doesn't fit our model, and we don't accept it. And that's sort of been accepted by the UN grudgingly. They're not happy with it, but
Yeah, I agree with that. So,
I
but
wouldn't say accepted, I just say
But
recognize.
can you see the point?
I'm sorry.
You want us to look when you think about it deeply. What I'm saying is as simple as this, and I think you will agree with me. I think you really will agree with me. When sort of absolutely, unrestrictedly, if all human rights had to exist at the same time, all 30 of them in the world, they would definitely contradict each other.
It wouldn't work.
I disagree.
China wouldn't agree.
No, you agreed previously. Let me explain why. Because do you know when you agreed? When I said to you, if there was a contradiction between the state sovereign
Okay, let me explain.
but I said this is the question I asked you, and you took the premise on board. I said if there was a contradiction between the state sovereign and the and freedom of speech or expression, which one should take priority? You said the freedom of expression or speech, right? No problem. That's a fine arbitration. That's a fine mitigation. That is a fine answer. However, what you've accepted is that there's a possibility for contradiction there.
There's always a possibility for contradiction in any system that allows for freedom of choice.
There you have it. So that's basically my
Each
argument.
country does what it wants to do, basically.
No, but listen, just because there is a
Sorry.
possibility for contradiction, that doesn't mean that this contradiction arises as a logical contradiction. This just arises due to...
Yeah, so what I'm saying, even if you wanted to look at it just from a human rights perspective, what I'm saying is this, is that the human rights that we're looking at here, there has to be arbitration. If you want to arbitrate it through the sovereign or through democracy or through whatever you want, there has to be arbitration. Now, really and truly, this is my understanding after a long time of looking into the matter. Your opinion is as valid as someone who says, look, the sovereign should take control in these situations where there's a national security or breach of the
What do you
peace.
mean by sovereign? Like a king or something?
The state.
Sovereign